really delighted, our capstone conversation with Ron Shaich, to talk about his book that just came out. Folks who might not know Ron should know that he's now the chair of Cava, and he's also the managing partner and CEO of Act 3 Holdings. But you mostly know him as the longtime CEO of Panera, and he led that out of All Pen and through a variety of transformations, most of which he talks about in the book. He is now working in a variety of private and philanthropic efforts, including Tate Bakery and Cafe, Live Alive, Organic Cafe, Life Alive. Okay, and Level 99. So you're a busy man. So Ron, welcome. I want to know, you do so many things, you're so busy. Why this book? Why now?
It's been a decade in the making. This is an overnight enterprise in 10 years.
Excellent,
Yes.
excellent. Well, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
I love to ask authors about these kind of memoirs. Tell us about you. Where did you grow up, and how did you get interested in business?
Well, before I do, Larry, let me tell our group here about the book just a little bit. You know, many of the business books, particularly the CEO, post-success books, are of a genre that I sort of verbalize as, I did well, here are my stories, you too can do well. And I find it mostly pretty irrelevant and fallacious.
Couldn't agree more.
You know, and I didn't want that. And I actually wanted a book that as much as anything extracted what were the lessons out of this? What is generalizable? What can I use in Tate and Life Alive and Level 99 and Cava? How do you do this? And why do some things really work and why do other companies not work? And there really is generalizations that make it better. And that's what I wanted from the book. Now, having said that, I also wanted something else. And if any of you are in business, you'll appreciate it. I wanted to talk about what it really was like, because it's always so glorified. And there's always a sense, there's such clarity. But truthfully, like anything else, it's a powerfully painful experience. Anytime you step out and you take a risk, and anytime you say we're going that way, and you got 125,000 people that you're asking to follow you, and you have billions of dollars of investor capital, it's a heavy burden on your shoulders. And there's a powerful perspective of how do you live your life in the context of that. So I thought what needed to be written was not simply about the glory, but as much about the pain and the process of how you manage through that pain, any pain, because you don't get to be our age. I'm 70. You don't get to be 70 without getting kneecapped in your life. And so that was my hope for this book, much more than just another business storybook.
You put it out there. It's very candid. And I think I said that in my Boston Business Journal
Yes.
comments on it. I do want to start, you're very personal in here, so I want to go back to that time. You talked about your mom and dad. Tell us, where'd you grow up? How did you get interested in this? I was fascinated because you talk about, as an undergrad, starting a store.
Yeah, we were both basically from we basically, there was a part of our lives, both Larry and I, from Worcester. But at any rate, I have been in Boston now for just shy of 50 years. And people ask me all the time, Ron, where are you from? And I say, Boston. They say, no, where you really from? And so I learned you're not from Boston unless you're born here. I happen to have been born.
It's true in Worcester, too.
I understand. I was born in New Jersey. And thank you. And I came up here to go to school at Clark in Worcester. And in New Jersey, 280 up to Livingston and West Orange, and exit 10 on the Mass Pike here in Worcester.
So talk a bit about Clark. When you got to Clark, did you, and you talk a bit about this in the book, you always liked business? You always liked to see what was working, what wasn't?
No, I wasn't a business guy at all.
Okay.
And most of us who end up in business end up in it, falling into it. I actually grew up in the 60s, in which the anti-war movement was raging. I came out of a family where that was very important. And I wanted to go fix the world. I wanted to have an impact. I wanted to make a difference. And I would have imagined I would have gone off to law school because that seemed to be the path most people took. But there I was in Worcester. I was on Main Street. I was a clerk, and I was in a convenience store. Any of you remember Store 24?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Store 24, where everybody bought their papers. But at any rate, there was Store 24. And we were in Store 24, and they tossed us out, and they essentially accused us of shoplifting. And I came back to, we didn't, and I came back to campus, and I said, the hell with these guys. Why are we letting them do this to us? Why don't we open our own store? And I could see a need, a powerful need for students to be served right and to get the products that they wanted. And I had the good fortune of being treasurer of the student body. And as treasurer of the student body, I was able to essentially propose a tax that raised $60,000 or $70,000. The students voted on it, they approved it. Now we had the money. Now the question was, how do we build this store? And then who's going to run it? I ended up volunteering. I stayed in Worcester that summer. Denholm's closed. We took out some of their counters and fixtures, and I got a drunken carpenter. We were given by the university the faculty wives thrift store to build this store. And I ended up building a store.
It's a great story.
Well, and here's the important point. For a kid who couldn't dance, a kid who couldn't sing, I had no creative skills whatsoever. I discovered business was the most creative thing I had ever been engaged in. It was like live performance art. It was like, actually in a political sense, building your own system, your own little society. And I loved it. I loved the people. I loved figuring it out. I loved figuring out why people were coming in. I loved making it happen. I loved the impact. And it was in that context that I discovered this about myself. And next thing I know, I'm told I can go to the Harvard Business School. They didn't accept me as an undergrad, so I went. I graduated, and I went off, and I had these two pulls, politics and business. And over the course of a bunch of years, I discovered, and any of you young people, you know, you'll find this out, all these paths led to the same place. When I did business, I was essentially taking a strategic or perspective. When I did politics and ran campaigns, which I did for a bunch of years, it was really about targeting the customer and figuring out who it is. And in fact, what business is an election day that never comes. There's no day. And what politics is a business that has one day in which the consumer votes. That's it. But it's very much the same kind of thing. And I discovered that about myself through that Clark experience.
Ron, I want to fast forward to Obon Pen. You're working there.
Yes.
Storied brand. You're working with a colleague you respected a whole lot.
Did you know Louis? Did you ever meet him?
Yes.
Yeah. He's a class act.
Terrific guy,
Yeah.
smart businessman, tough businessman. So you're working, company's doing well. St. Louis Bread sort of comes along. Tell us about the genesis of Panera.
Well, the genesis of Panera is really began with the genesis of Au Bon Pain. So I opened a cookie store on Winter Street in downtown Boston. It was 1980. Nobody would lease me space. My friend Dick Friedman here at Carpenter Company, they had a lease in Harvard Square. They wouldn't lease it to me. I had a jewelry store. Inflation was running 20% at that time. Jewelry store that wanted to consolidate its inventory into one store. They had two of them. And they leased me 400 square feet right by Park Street Station. And I had 50,000 people going by every single day. But nobody bought cookies before 12 noon. So I decided, what the heck, I might as well put something in. I became a licensee of this company called Au Bon Pain. And Louis, who was extraordinary, they had opened 13 of these Au Bon Pains and closed 10 of them. And they had run into a lot of troubles. And they had 3 stores and a lot of debt. And I'll be very frank with you, as an operator, you would know. You know which of your vendors are any good and which aren't. They were providing me product. Sometimes they showed up, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they billed me, sometimes they didn't. To this day, I'm sure I still owe them money. But they were so out of control. And I said, wow, this is a powerful opportunity to apply what I'd learned in the cookie business, where I had been after business school, to the French bakery business. And Louis and I hit it off, and we decided to merge these two companies. Louis had the access to the real estate and all kinds of things. I knew how to run it. And we put my one cookie store together with his 3 French bakeries. That company, Au Bon Pain Co. Inc., we formed in 1981, was ultimately, after 4 major transformations, the company we sold for $7.5 billion in 2017. So same as that company, just had taken different forms along the way. So from Au Bon Pain, the first major transformation of my life, which is what this book is about, transformation, was a realization. And I'm basically organized my life not around the success of it all. What I organize it around is, what did I learn? And then what did I do with that learning? And that to me is the part of it that I'm the most proud of, not where it ended up getting us. And that first learning, I was working in Au Bon Pain, and I'd have customers walk in and say, I want that baguette. I say, sure. And they say, slice it. I start to slice it like you slice bread, like that. They say, no, slice it from top to bottom. and I didn't understand, and I'd hand them the bread. And they'd pull out a bag from Stop and Shop, and they put some roast beef and boursin on my bread. And I started to say, wait a second, what is it they really want? What's the need that they're seeking? What job are they hiring us for? And what they really wanted was the sandwich, not just my bread. And what we eventually concluded was the opportunity was in being a bakery cafe selling sandwiches, not a croissant and bread shop selling bread and croissant. That was a major transformation, because this broken down company with $3 million in debt, we started applying that. First of it was at Copley Place, and we did Harvard Square. Many of you remembered that one. It just took off like wildfire, and that led to an IPO. The IPO was in 1991. We were the premier player in these French bakery cafes. And if you want to talk about it, we can tonight, but running a public company, I ran it for 27 years, longer than Cal Ripken played baseball. And in running that public company, I can tell you what the public markets pay for is growth. That's where we often talk about earnings per share. What really matters to your valuation is what multiple is applied to that, and that multiple is a perception of your future growth. So in most simple terms. And by 1993, Au Bon Pain was already starting to flatten out. Its growth was, was slowing down. And most public companies are like lemmings. They follow that growth right off the edge of the cliff, because they can't face not telling the market that they're not generating the growth the market wants. And that's where your valuation comes from, your stock price. And Louis and I felt like we needed to let Au Bon Pain grow the way it could at its own organic growth rate. It was successful in New York, Boston, and Washington. It led us to backward integrating into manufacturing, which we'd always done. We started selling into BJ's and Sam's Club, and Stephanie, you dealt with something that came later after that, was the same thing. We ended up building an international business, saying there were more high-density locations outside America than in America. And then I ended up buying a 20-store chain in St. Louis called the St. Louis Bread Company. And I bought it for $23 million. That became Panera. But I ultimately saw it as a path to the suburban marketplace. If Au Bon Pain was working in urban, this was going to be a powerful vehicle for suburban locations.
Ron, what did you like? Because you talk a little bit about this in the book. You do a lot of work just sitting there, watching people come in. What got you excited about St. Louis bread?
If you have a retail sensibility, all you have to do is watch the way customers react. It was 6:30 in the morning. I went out the way I got to know these guys, a lot of people call me up and they ask me to have breakfast. They want to talk about franchising. And I spent 4 hours convincing them they shouldn't franchise. I had never been to their cafes, and they said, hey, come out in a month or two. I went out, treated me nicely. I got up early in the morning. Their stores opened at 6:30. I wanted to see them open. I brought a friend of mine, Mark Borland, with me, who was our COO. And I watched, and I was blown away. It was 6:30 in the morning. There were people lined up at the door, and they wanted in. Wow, that's interesting. What's going on here, right? And I watched the way they reacted to their muffins, the way they reacted to their sourdough bread. Couldn't get this was before the days of espresso. They had it. And this was something it was touching people. And then I started to look behind the feelings, and I looked at the numbers, and they were generating volumes almost as high as we were in Au Bon Pain, but in real estate that cost half the price. And I began saying, this is a powerful vehicle, and again, oftentimes like so much in life, we all think we control life, and as, business people, we're masters of the universe. We control about, I don't know, I'm going to make it up, but half of what actually ends up happening. The other half is really reacting to what you see and experience and learn. And so what I basically believe is that ability to have empathy, to listen and learn, is one of the most powerful skills any business person can have.
You did it with a lot of people, and I want to touch on both employees, board, managing activist investors. So I want to talk about those 3 different constituencies, because you cover them at different times in the book. Talk a bit about, I want people to read the book. That's the most important piece. Talk a little bit
buy
about...
the book.
Buy the book.
It came out last night.
Yes.
First day. We're #1 in entrepreneurship in Amazon today. And I want this thing to work. So I need you to go out and buy these books. And if you like it, I want to see a positive endorsement on Amazon.
Well,
all right, that's the end of the commercial.
Well, we've got our independent bookseller here, so we'll have to get you...
Okay, wherever you buy it.
Yes.
All we care about is buy it. Mm-hmm.
So, Ron, talk a little bit about how you recruited folks to do things and what you valued and what you looked for.
In people, in English, people gave a shit. I mean, people who cared, people who really cared. When we competed, we often competed against companies that had people with far better resumes. But it wasn't the resume. We didn't want the folks that were focused on their next job. We wanted folks that fundamentally cared about our mission, that could tie in, could connect and align their own sense of self with our mission. Running a public company, I used to think to myself, there ain't many of my 125,000 employees that are waking up saying, I'm so happy. We made another penny a share today for the shareholders of Panera. Nobody cares. What do they care about? They have their own agendas, their own needs. And my job as a CEO is to connect with what their needs are, to try to understand them and help them appreciate how they will do better for what they want out of life, what they need, as part of what we're trying to do here. And to get that connection and get that affiliation. And so one of the things that another one of my favorite chapters in this book is the CEO as parish priest or rabbi, however you want to cut it. But essentially, so much of the role of the CEO is providing meaning in a world in which everything is in transition. And so a whole bunch of, any of you who've ever worked with me, a whole bunch of what the role really is to try to help people understand understand where we're coming from, longitudinally, where we've been, try to make sense of what's happened with the consumer, with the numbers, with everything. Where are we at today? And then based on the decisions that you all as our team makes, what you choose to do, where we're going to end up. Not different than what a Sunday sermon is. Trying to help people to think in a real way, what is it that is the implication of our actions? Because I think oftentimes we as people, all of us, are way too often in a reactive mode, reacting to what our competitors are doing, reacting to what the Jones are doing, reacting to all those people around us. And one of the precepts of this book, sorry to run, Larry.
Oh, that's all right.
And
it's good stuff.
I started the book with this. I started the book with the death of my parents. And I used it to try to share something that I learned. In watching them both pass away, I learned that there's a judgment day. And I'm not here in a religious sense to tell you there's a judgment day up there. I don't know. That's a personal decision. But I do know if you have the opportunity before you pass, you look at your life. And that's the time you want to feel good. And what the lesson for me is the time to do that kind of evaluation of your life is not in the 9th inning with 2 outs. It's in the 7th inning, the 5th inning, the 3rd inning. And it led to a process that I call a premortem, which is essentially to sit back and say, in every sphere of your life, where do you want to be in 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years? For me personally, it began with asking the questions, how do I want to be in relationship with my body, my health? How do I want to be in relationship with my family, my wife, my kids? How do I want to be in relationship with my work? and my organization? How do I want to be in terms of my own spirituality? And I'd literally have this vision. I'd write it out. And then I would say every year, how do I get there? What are the steps? And then I'd break it down into every quarter. And literally, we began to use that kind of discipline in business. Sit down and say to yourself, where do I want to be in 5 years? When they write that article in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, Kava did this or Kava did that. What are the 2 or 3 or 4 things that actually led that to happen? What are the things that will really matter when you get there? And then to step back and make sure you organize everything against that. When you're doing the doing of running a business, literally to do that. And so we would take those, we'd call them key initiatives, and we prioritize them. Some of those were initiatives that I said, if we didn't get them done, they were so important, I should fire myself. Because my job is to actually make sure they get done. And then we'd organize a calendar around that. And all of these pieces together helped us take that learning from our premortem, our business premortem, help us take this learning and actually build out a better organization, an organization that delivers better. Sorry, Larry.
Oh, no, terrific. Ron, how do you decide the folks you take along the way? The directors? And then
As in
the
board of
shareholders?
directors?
Board of directors, shareholders. And know that you're speaking both in this room but also in live stream to lots of entrepreneurs who are going to ask, do I need a board? How should I use my board? How should I think about my investors?
Yeah, okay, so let's separate them. So let's talk, and we can even talk about an IPO. So let's talk about investors first and then a board. So investors, the best way to think about taking investment is to think about having a baby with someone. You know, once you have that child, you're bound to that person for a very long time. Right? You need to share because that person shares something you care about, that child. Same thing with investment. Somebody puts money in, their equity, they have every right, as you do, to pursue what they want with that business. So one of the things to really think about is not taking in money, is absolutely not the valuation, but who are they? What do they care about? If you care so deeply about fulfilling some vision, you better be sure that they're with you.
That's great advice.
And you're going to have the time. Because money, it comes with something. And you're going to have to share this with them. And in particular, if you're giving up control, here's my definition of control. Right? If we get in a pissing match, you leave and I stay. That's control, right? And the question is, if you take in investment capital, what happens if you don't agree? How does that work out? How does that work out against your vision? And typically, for most investors, you're one of multiple different investments they're making, and they want to push it to the wall. They're mostly focused, if they have LPs, on their next liquidation event. And quite honestly, their interests are different than yours. They may be supportive of it, but their commitment to it is going to be different, and you need to figure that out. Now, I want to step back and talk about a board. And I don't care whether your board is investors or it's a public board with lots of independence. Boards don't run companies. Good companies are run by a CEO. What boards do is ask hard questions. And once you get past fiduciary responsibility and sort of the integrity of the whole thing, right? Boards basically can hire and fire, but the real role of a board is to make people think. And my best board members always made me think in ways I hadn't thought before. And they were wise enough to know that flying in 4 times a year or 6 times a year, they weren't running the company from the board. They were actually helping me think and then letting me as the CEO do the job. And then holding me accountable and evaluating me, but year after year on what the work I was doing
That's
was.
great advice. Ron, you also oversaw sort of the transformation of the menu, which I thought was really cool. Not just following trends, but deciding, we're going to get rid of some of this artificial stuff. I want to do the right thing. I don't want to give away too much in the book, but talk a little bit about that, what motivated it. It wasn't just Wall Street.
No,
We got to do the right thing.
If it was Wall Street, I would have never done it. And I want to tell you, it's about much more than the menu. So, in fact, I'll share with you 2 other transformations. The book goes into it in much greater detail. You talked to one of them, but I want to talk to one that came before that. 1999. I was kind of bumming. I had 4 divisions. This St. Louis bread company had renamed Panera. We had really discovered the code to what is now called fast casual. And I won't take you through it, but it was a powerful learning in the early 90s. That learning really said that the currencies of fast food was a lot of food for not a lot of money. We said there was a consumer out there, maybe 1 in 3, who wanted something more. They wanted real food, environments that engaged them, people that actually cared. They wanted something that elevated their self-esteem, didn't just deplete it. And that learning, which became the ideology of fast casual, was infused into Panera, and Panera became the poster child for that. Certainly at its best, it was. By 1999, Panera was one of 4 divisions, as I said, each one run by a professional manager. You had Panera, you had Au Bon Pain International, which we had evolved, and that manufacturing wholesale business. And I was feeling bummed because I was looking at this thing called Panera, and I was saying, my God, this has the potential to be nationally dominant. I could see it and feel it. There was about 150 stores at that time. It wasn't our largest division, but it was stable volumes, and I could feel what the consumer was feeling. And I remember saying, we're going to screw this thing up. We don't have enough capital to support it, and the folks running it, good people, but they don't know what's going to hit them. They don't know what growth is all about. Right? They really don't. And I said, I'm really bummed by this. And I was down in the Caribbean, a friend looked at me and said, Ron, what would you do if Panera was the name of the company? Panera owned this company. What would you do if it was that instead of the reverse, the way it is, Au Bon Pain owning it? And I thought for a second, I said, if I had any guts, I'd monetize every asset I had. I'd take all that capital and the very best people, and I'd go down to St. Louis, and I'd make Panera fulfill its destiny. This is the golden goose. This is the gem. This is the thing to take care of. And I'm a kind of person, often, if I think about it and I really feel good about it, I'm going to go do it. It took me about 3 months to do it. It led to the worst year and a half of my life.
And you talk about that too.
Yeah, I was hell.
Yeah.
I mean, I sold my first son, Au Bon Pain. And Louis went with that. He had pancreatic cancer. He wouldn't tell anybody. Being the gentleman he was, he went with it to enable the deal to happen, and then died just a couple years later. And I went off I kept the company. I basically kept the public company, sold off all the divisions, went down to St. Louis, and we simply changed the name of Au Bon Pain, going to Panera, and off we went, which then led to, and by the way, sidebar comment here, you'll love it. If you wanted to buy my stock at that point, you could have bought it for a penny on the dollar what it eventually sold for. Right? And people say to me all the time, Ron, why didn't you tell me? And I want to look at them and go, you jerk. I was telling you. Nobody wanted to listen. Right? But at any rate, we began to evolve into this vision of fast casual, what our concept essence was for Panera. It worked. It succeeded. And through the 2000s, we grew it to like 1,500 restaurants. It was very strong. And by 2009, we went through the recession, and I was personally feeling, it's one of the reasons for the book, I had learned so much in this process. I wanted to apply it much more broadly in civic society. And I'd had a series of discussions with the Obama administration. I couldn't take it because of my commitments in Panera. And I decided I really wanted to see what would happen if I jumped off the diving board. I've been running this company for decades. What would it feel like to not be there? And I decided to do it in 2009. And I handed over the reins to one of my very dearest friends in the world, a guy named Bill Morton, who became our CEO. And I went off. First thing I did, the day after I the day after I handed the keys to Bill, I opened something called Panera Cares, which I had been working on for a year. We ended up building 5 of them. They were cafes of shared responsibility in which there were no set prices. And it was a test of humanity. What would people do if we didn't force them to leave any money? We just said, pay it forward, do the right thing. And that's another story. It often worked. But at any rate, I went off, started doing some political stuff, helped form a group called No Labels, some of you may know, which is getting a lot of heat now because we're trying to provide an alternative. But I helped co-found that. I got involved in a bunch of things. I was doing a lot of speaking on the pervasive short-termism in the capital markets, and I was still the executive chairman and largest shareholder of Panera. And I was doing M&A work, mergers and acquisitions, and I came back after a weekend, and I was just like pumped up. And I sat at my computer, and I wrote a document that weekend, how I would screw with Panera, how I would compete with Panera if I weren't part of Panera. Like, what would you do to put Panera at a disadvantage? And it included, it was a broad call for digital access, loyalty, which didn't exist in the restaurant industry at that time, was at Kroger and Tesco. A whole new approach. As the founder, I think I could take on the sacred cow, how we go to market and how we compete, and to organize it around what we call craveable wellness and clean food, and a different approach to our food, to rebuilding our production system, taking on all these things I thought were broken in Panera. And I gave the memo to Bill, and he read it, and he said, my God, there's a lot here. I said, yeah. He said, would you go work on it? I said, sure, Bill. We loved each other. And I said, sure. And 9 months later, the executive chairman was working 80 hours a week on this prototype for this new vision for how to compete. And I'm loving it because I don't have any of the ceremonial duties of CEO, none of the speeches, none of that stuff. I didn't have to, deal with it. And I was having the time of my life. And Bill ultimately came to me and said he had an issue in his own personal life. He couldn't travel. And ultimately, one thing, we tried being co-CEOs, and then a year later, I came back as CEO. He became executive vice chairman, later my other partner. But we just swapped roles, and I came back as CEO, and I put in place this vision. And it led to I think the largest and most massive transformation in the restaurant industry of a large company. It's been done in the last 20 or 30 years. And it was hell. I mean, if I had ever known what I was getting into, it was so brutal. I had an activist for the second time. Again, one of them became my partner later, but it's another good story in here. But I had activists along the way. I had everybody quit because bonuses were down. Everybody was, was unhappy. I can just remember one of the stories I tell, and I want to talk about it, is driving out in Starl Drive. And I can remember it. I'd be up at 4 a.m. every morning, and as Vince Lombardi once put it, he never ran out of time. He never lost a game. He ran out of time. And I was just worried I wasn't going to have the time to pull this off. And I was investing 150 to 200 million. And the activists were coming in and saying, you don't have to spend that, you can outsource it. And you can take that money, buy back stock, and we'll pop the stock, and you, Ron, can worry about the carcass later. But at any rate, I had people quitting, and I can remember being on Starl Drive thinking to myself, my God, I got 125,000 people. Right, this is their mortgages and their kids' college education and their livelihood. I better not screw this thing up. And I got $6 billion of investor capital. And my God, those are the people that believe in me. I want to make sure they're right, that they come off feeling right. And I'll never forget that sense of pressure and that sense that, where's the next stomach punch coming from? And that comes, and it comes at one after another after another. And you look up at the ceiling and you say, this has got to end. It can't keep going like this. But it does. And then it does change. And that was, a powerfully and massive transformation.
It's just a terrific chapter. Ron, I want to get folks to their to the book signings. Last question for you. For folks here, for folks listening, a book that you'd recommend, either one you're reading now or that you found consequential in your business life that you think people ought to read?
A book, a movie. I've been very enamored. I don't know if you saw the movie Golda. It came out. It's now on Apple TV 6 weeks ago. But it's really the story of Golda Meir going through the Yom Kippur War. And I keep thinking, when I think about responsibility, because so much of my life has been about being responsible, what is the sense of responsibility when you're sending men and women to war? And they're dying. on your decision? What's that sense of responsibility when you got 400 people trapped? And if you send in other troops, you could lose 600 people trying to save the 400. And the number of people that got broken by that. Moshe Dayan had a nervous breakdown when they lost the Golan Heights. And what is that sense of responsibility of leadership? And you know, I don't know about you all, just a little commercial announcement, not for the book. But I think so often what our generation has done, and how do we make this place better? I mean, the world we're handing off to our kids with the climate issues and the polarization and I mean, you know, Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East. I mean, we have got to figure out a better way to live or we're going to destroy ourselves. And this sense of responsibility is real for us individually. It's absolutely real for anybody that's putting themselves on the line as a business leader or the leader of anything that has other people whose livelihoods or lives are going to depend on that decision. And I think it's a really interesting point that's worth thinking about. What does it mean to be responsible?
Great example. The book is Know What Matters. Please pick it up. Invite yourself back there to pick that book up, to say hello to Ron Shaich. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
For our viewers on live stream, this has been Authors and Innovators 2023. If you want to learn more or suggest a book, send us an email or drop us a line at authorsinnovators.org. Thanks for joining us.